Home check. I'm an armed private security officer in Colorado Springs, and over the past few months, my company's been doing a specific property check within a community we already patrol at night. 1315 Wood Ave has been an interesting thing in the past, better known as the Burns Mansion. On Old Millionaires Row in the Old North End, James Ferguson Burns, who died in Colorado Springs, was a very wealthy man across his numerous endeavors in the greater Colorado area. His death was suspected in the mansion on September 23, 1917, as well as a few servants on the property. Earlier this year, 2020, acting as an 8-unit apartment building, a suspicious death occurred on property, promoting the city to step in. After conducting the police and forensic investigation of the death, the city immediately shut down the entire property, and it was renovated, and was also brought up to code. But these events displaced all the tenants and families with no warning. It was said that James Burns dabbled in spiritualism via a spirit board or mediums. On the night of September 21st, the patrol officer was on duty for that area. Our normal SOP for the property is to check around the enormous house and to ensure that the primary structure is secured and that area homeless haven't made entry. After dismounting from my cruiser, I began to check the street side of the property, starting at the front cellar access, which had no added normal signs. A discarded coffee cup from one of the contractors, a few piles of wood, stuff like that. So I started toward the grand patio that nearby wraps the front-facing side. At the far end, I noticed the porch swing was slightly swinging side to side, not back and forth, but I thought nothing of it, as this home is at an old location. I began around the rear of the mansion, and as soon as I came around the gate, I heard a staggered elder's man's voice faintly coming from the servants' quarters on the second floor of the carriage house. So instead of checking the rear of the mansion first, I followed SOP and went straight to investigate the sounds. At the mouth of the carriage house was all the discarded personal items of the tenants that were displaced, and they were unable to collect. Making a path to the stairs was an uneasy trek. Old furniture, toys, photos, and such covered most of the ground. While trying not to fall while making my way, I heard the elderly voice again, but it was still faint and unintelligible. Now know that the possibility of an intruder was nearly 100%. I drew my sidearm and clasped my light between my fingers. I announced myself in the loudest command tone I could manage, leaving no doubt that I would be heard. After the second attempt of commanding that anyone identify themselves failed, I moved up the stairs. The second level is in such a state of decay that it looked as if the setting of a horror movie. After clearing the small 4-room area, I had only a small walk-in closet left, thinking surely this is where the subject is. I kept my sidearm level and I whipped the door open. Nothing occupied the space. I holstered thinking that I just had too much or too little caffeine, or a raccoon was being playful. I exited the carriage house to resume checking the mansion door barricades, to ensure that they were either locked or undamaged. While at the parlor doorway, I saw a shadow from behind the door under the straight split at the bottom. Aggravated, I ran to the parlor window, flashing the entire room to see who the hell was walking around inside. Again, nothing. No sign that anything had been inside since earlier that day. Now pissed that so many weird things were happening, I checked the rest of the doors, which were all locked. I headed back to the cruiser and lit a cigarette. As I took a long, exasperated drag, the inside lights flickered off briefly. I look up to the second floor, where a discolored face peered out before the light sprang back on. I flicked my butt and said to myself, yes, screw that. Jumped into the car and called out. 1315, code 4. Clearing. Mac Nope. 2 years ago, with my current armed security company, we had a shopping center at the suburb of Rick Rimmon, Colorado Springs. In the shopping center was an old closed-down McDonald's. Local legend is that this McDonald's was haunted. Dead former employees, an Indian burial ground, cursed, The story varied from high school to high school, and growing up a few miles away, everyone knew the legend. My company started providing services to the whole shopping center due to teens hanging out after hours, homeless camping in the front of the shops, and in the self-service car wash. But this McDonald's was abandoned, closed for a long time. Sometimes we would have to respond to calls from the property manager about would-be ghost hunters and Wiccans trying to get in to do God knows what. Well, one warm night in August, while training a new hiree, we were walking around looking for kids and homeless, when from the car wash we hear an ear-shattering sound from inside the McDonald's. We ran straight over, flashlights and guns drawn, scanning every corner of the exterior structure. We had no key to access the inside, but were permitted to enter if someone had forced their way in. But there were no signs of entry, no damage. The fire ladder to the roof was still up. So confused, we looked at each other, wondering how a scream could have come from inside. The new guy was fresh out of the army and was new to the area, so he had never heard the stories. I began telling every version I knew while he kept shining his light through the window to see if anything was inside. While on the last iteration involving the Indian burial ground, the new guy yelled out the least manly scream I've ever heard. Without the words finding their way out, he just pointed to the window. I looked in from where he was standing. Standing in the opposite side of the store from the window stood a shadowy mass about 6 feet tall with large white eyes. It stood there examining us for a brief moment, then darted into the back kitchen area. I grabbed the new guy by his shirt and started running to the back door opposite side of the building, thinking some prankster would run out. But no, the door was still padlocked from the outside. We called the property manager and CSPD out to search the building. When the property manager arrived and opened the door for the cops to clear the building and property, the manager came over to ask, "Saw it, did you?" The 3 of the CSPD officers came out within a few minutes saying that nothing was inside. We got a call screen number for a report and went on to the next patrol property. For the rest of the night, the new guy was very quiet, saying very little, and after his first night solo on patrol, he ended up quitting the next day, no resignation, said very little, and handed over his uniform and equipment. To this day, I don't know why he quit, and he wouldn't speak to annoy on the staff after departing, so I wonder if that figure with the large white eyes still haunted him. Piano poltergeist. When I was 19, working in unarmed security, I was placed as a flex officer at a retirement home while the regular officer went on vacation. The first 2 shifts were learning the main care hospice building and learning the apartment and the cottage buildings for the independent seniors. Usually we only had to check the outer buildings a couple times at night to make sure no one was wandering around and no wildlife were getting in the trash. But my experiences began in the main building on the second shift, after the regular officer had left for his vacation. One of the morbid duties that wasn't an overly often occurrence was escorting a body from the facility with the coroner to usually the family of the resident. On that night, a very elderly woman passed around 1 a.m. with her daughter and grandsons around her. Just after 1:45 a.m., I greeted the coroner at the service entrance and we took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The ride was unsettling. Both myself and the coroner were in absolute silence in the elevator ride, and it seemed to feel like hours long. My eyes were fixated on the gurney, donning a reddish body bag with the funeral home logo. I stood at the room door as the family cried as the nurse and coroner took possession of the woman's now lifeless form. All of us, including the family, walked into the elevator to go to the ground floor level, to see her into the medical van. And as it pulled away, the grandsons thanked and shook my hand for my assistance, though I felt I had done nothing. For the rest of the night, it seemed slow yet eerie. I kept thinking about the gurney with the body bag and how life is uncertain. The following night, I was sitting at the welcome desk, sitting across from our on-duty nurse who dozed off. I was reading a book about the history of the occult when I noticed from across the main reception hall, where entertainers or youth groups came to lighten their spirits of the residents, the desert carousel machine with its dim, soft white light flickered. It didn't flicker due to an electric default, but instead as if someone was standing in front of it or walked past it. I walked out to see if a resident was maybe looking for a late-night treat, but the area was void of anyone but myself. I brushed off the oddity as just my eyes started acting up. As soon as I returned to the desk, the grand piano that sat halfway between the desert carousel and my desk struck 3 keys. I began to get spooked, so I decided now was the best time to do a property check. As I was returning down to the last resident hall toward the reception area, I heard the music of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. I felt my blood go cold. I staggered toward the reception area hoping to see a resident or even the nurse. As soon as I hit the threshold into the reception area, it fell dead silent. I nervously checked to see if there were maybe a player's piano, but found that it required a pianist. As I was still inspecting the piano with my light, the nurse walked over. "Why did you stop and play? It was really nice." I turned with confusion and a little bit of fear. That wasn't me. The nurse's face went white. "Stone, do you know what time it is?" She extended her wrist to where I saw the time, 1:07 a.m. We both went out to the smoking area, which was probably not permitted for resident safety reasons. Shortly after, the nurse refused to be left alone, so I accompanied her. When she did her rounds checking on all the residents, while on the 3rd floor, 2 doors down from the recently deceased woman's room, we heard faint music. The family was still in the process of removing her items, but one item was left on her nightstand, and we found that it was the source of the soft, haunting song. Sitting there was a small music box, playing a haunting version of Moonlight Sonata. A middle-of-the-road motel. As some of you may know, I'm an armed, uniformed security officer in my city. Well, 2 years ago, my company was providing services for a motel named the Knight's Inn. The motel was preparing to shut down for a massive remodel, as well as code and structural updates. Now, the motel was previously 2 separate motels, but when the Knight's Inn bought it, they merged properties into one. During nearly 20 years of running between both of the original motels, they saw some rather negative events. This location just happens to be within walking distance from the county jail, so when a number of people were released from custody, they found their way to this motel over the years. Murders, drug overdoses, and suicides were all reported on the property. All these dark events left negative imprints on these grounds. Fast forward to when I worked on the property during the overnight hours, and 3 events during 3 separate shifts where I worked, and the one I responded to as a cover officer. The first was on my 4th shift. The first few went very slow and boring. No one had told my staff the history of the property at this point. Well, the second to last 3-week operation, I was helping on night audit, preparing the morning breakfast bar, and the kitchen was in part of the building that had long since shut down. The auditor was preparing waffle batter and filling pitchers of orange juice when an unopened 12-pack of canned soda exploded next to the service access stairwell that was padlocked from the inside of the service hallway to the kitchen. The auditor's scream was chilling, as well as deafening. Well, due to some of the less than upstanding guests they'd rent rooms to, I began downstairs to find that the doors were still secured and no one could have entered through. I then stuck my finger in the puddle of soda, thinking that it may have overheated or something, causing them to burst, but nope. It was slightly cool. As I looked at the auditor still shaking, holding a small kitchen knife, trying to calm her down, we both heard a loud little girl giggle, but it sounded unusual. We, needless to say, both bolted from the kitchen back to the main desk. 5 minutes later, the auditor told me, "No one checked in tonight has kids." The following week, and the last week of the location being open before the remodel, I was doing the standard grounds patrolling, making sure no doors were unsecure or people fighting. Just about the time I finished, I got a call from the front desk calling a Code 6 priority. I ran back to the office, nearly tripping on the stairs in the courtyard. Once arrived, I saw a young black woman with her daughter, just the cutest little 3-year-old. The mother was crying uncontrollably but managed to tell her husband was not himself. After nearly an hour in their room, he pulled a knife out of nowhere and started wildly swinging in the room at his wife and kid. The wife said that he hates weapons and wouldn't have had one, so I began searching the grounds for the man and found him sitting in a dark corner of the courtyard area. He had the knife in his hand and was blankly staring ahead. Once the knife hit the light, I saw blood. Then I noticed he was bleeding. I ordered he drop the knife as he slowly started to walk towards me. I repeated it a second time, then a third, and I drew my weapon and ordered that he stop to think about his kid. Right as I did, 3 local officers sprang from behind me. 2 of their CEW tasers drawn. In a quickly happening display, I heard the deputy order, then followed taser, taser, taser. The local officers took the man in custody, and he was having me fill out a statement when I overheard 2 of the deputies saying, "Want to know what's odd? The room they were staying in had a suspicious death a few days ago, but detectives say it was drug-induced suicide." The other deputy replied, "Huh, what are the odds that this guy went nuts? I think personally that that's a little odd that a man commits suicide. Come to find that he cut his arm till he bled out, and then a week later, another man loses his mind, cuts himself up, and is unresponsive the whole time he was being spoken to." The most damning paranormal event, in my opinion, that happened was the first week closed for remodeling. I was walking around in the inside, and another officer stopped in to hang out and break. I made the suggestion that we sit in the old restaurant and see if the place was for real haunted. He reluctantly agreed. Using a spirit box app on my phone, that before that night I thought I overpaid for, we sat and asked questions. For about 20 minutes, nothing came through, and we joked that maybe the place wasn't haunted at all. I thought I saw something across the room, so I tried maybe to light it, but come to find my flashlight had died. So while sitting at the table, I pulled my taser out of the holster as we sat in a pitch-black room to use the light if needed. Instantly, the Spirit Box app said, "Yellow gun," in the same voice. Now mind you that me and this other officer had the same level of training, and we were fully certified to the city, but his response was, "Fuck does that mean by yellow gun?" I then proceeded to place my taser on the table and turned its light on. I never heard so many F-bombs as he stormed out of the room. The final incident I am still kind of unsure of, but the one phrase the subject yelled, "There will be more ghosts here tonight if you enter." 4 weeks after the motel closed, I was working a city patrol when the on-duty officer called for priority backup from all available officers on duty. "Sam 262 tonight's in. What's the situation?" The officer responded, 4 to 6 persons who made it enter into the back building and barricaded themselves into a room." I was the first responding officer just after 3 a.m. and met with an officer on duty. As we were talking to a third officer, we heard 3 gunshots ring out from down the hallway. At this time, we contacted the local sheriff's office about the situation, and within minutes several deputies arrived in ASV, active shooter vests, and helmets. We attempted to reach the room as we watched from the end of the hallway. 5 more shots rang from the doorway, and luckily no one was struck. The deputies fell back to the end of the hallway, where the 3 of us were. A supervisor for the deputies ordered to watch the hallway as the rest took position around the building. We asked what we needed to do, and he replied to block the entrances to the property. And no one comes on that it isn't an officer. So basically, we were to keep out of the impeding reporters. SWAT arrived, and the deputies pulled back and the SWAT took position. The whole time the suspect saw the activity from the windows and holes of the door. A lieutenant with SWAT and a public relations officer came over to me and the other guy on my staff, asking us what happened before deputies responded. We all heard from a broken-out window. "There will be more ghosts here tonight if you enter." Around 5 a.m., the SWAT armored vehicle pulled up next to the back of the building and we hear 3 thumps. SWAT shot OC shells into the room before breaching the windows and doorway. And just as soon as we hear the thumps and see the smoke, 5 of the suspects were being carried out, and a 6th was being rushed to the straight board into an ambulance. Come to find the man with the pistol in the room took his 5 friends hostage and attempted to kill himself when SWAT breached. He later died at the hospital, so I wonder if he joined the other ghosts in the motel. After that night, we no longer provided security at the Night's Inn. 8 months later, it reopened as some new-aged hipster hotel. I haven't been to that property for some time now. Even though I pass whenever I work over the city patrol, I wonder how the property is, and if the paranormal activity still happens after the remodel. The caretaker. My dad grew up in New Orleans in the 9th Ward. When he was a kid, my biological grandfather died in the line of duty with NOPD. Jumped to when I was 8 years old, while my father was visiting my grandmother for the summer, and my dad wanted to visit my grandfather's grave. As some of you may know, the graves in New Orleans are above ground due to the terrain and moist, swampy soil, and can be labyrinths of family plots and crypts that can be foreboding. We went to visit on a Thursday afternoon in early June. Though it was super hot and humid, my cousins were saying it was cold because of the cloud cover. I'm from Colorado, so cold is nothing to me, but I don't do heat well. Went at my family's plot in the center of the graveyard. I wandered off because I needed to use the bathroom, and foolishly listened to my cousin who was the same age where the bathroom was. After 30 minutes of wandering around, not knowing where the hell the gate or reception hall were, I decided to pee on an old willow tree. After whipping my head back and forth several times to make sure I wouldn't get in any trouble for doing so, I finished up. When I was done, I realized I had no clue where I was. The tombs, plots, and crypts looked completely different, being old, dirty, cracking, and weathered. I tried my best to retrace my steps, but no luck. I began to panic a little bit. Here I was 8 years old in a cemetery I'd never been in, or have never really remembered being to, and waiting for the crazy New Orleans summer rainstorms to let loose. I started to cry a little and kept walking. And after a few minutes, I found an older man that was working on the plot. Brownish overalls, cream light yellow t-shirt, and an old-time brimmed hat. He was a big, strong-looking dark black man, not trying to sound bad, but as big as Michael Clark Duncan, and as dark as Wesley Snipes. He said his name was Frank, and he was a working caretaker for the grounds. Frank was very kind and nice to me. Frank told me, "Take my hand, son, and we'll get you back to your folks." We began to walk past several rows of plots and tombstones, and shortly got near to where my family was. At 3 rows out, Frank said, "All right, buddy, just head down these next 3 rows and turn left. Your family will be down that way." I shook his hand and he gave me a big warm smile. I got to the 3rd row and turned around to wave goodbye, but Frank was gone. I went down to my family where my dad was angry. I went off alone, and my mom was freaking out, but I knew I was in trouble, so I kept my mouth shut. When we finally left before 6 p.m., we stopped at the gatehouse before a sign out or something. I looked confused, looked at his screen, and then a notebook. He started to say, "Boy, you and your family are the only folks since 2 p.m. that were here besides me." I said no, that Frank was on the grounds, and he was the keeper. He replied, "Hey kid, there is no groundskeeper named Frank that worked here. You must have imagined it." I squeaked at him. No, he helped me when I got lost. We left shortly after, but to this day, I know I was helped by Frank. I don't know if he was a real person or a kindly spirit, but his warm, kind smile made me feel safe, like everything was all right, being lost in a New Orleans cemetery. Night shift at the deaf and blind school. I've been working armed security for nearly a decade now, but I still remember working unarmed when I started out in my early 20s. I worked my way to a trusted position with my agency, where at 20 years old, I was assigned to the Colorado Springs Deaf and Blind School. At the time, my only senior, more experienced officers were permitted to work there at all, but I was given the 9 a.m. to 5 a.m. shifts, Monday nights through Saturday mornings. Little backstory on the Deaf and Blind School. It was opened in the early 1870s and was where the burdened children of the state were sent to learn and live. But many were put to work there as laborers working fields or manufacturing items. Because of the number of ailments, accidents, or pre-existing health conditions, a large number of children and staff passed while there, to where in the early 1880s a small cemetery was created, formerly at the intersection of Pikes Peak Ave and Institute Street. Growing up in Colorado Springs, I was always told ghost stories about the flesh-eating bacteria and stuffed taxidermy animals, ghosts walking in buildings, and the haunted service tunnels below the school connecting to the old train depot, but never really believed it. Fast forward to my 3rd month posted there, 2 nights before my 21st birthday, and a full week before students returned to the fall semester for actual special needs schooling, and I had my first encounter in the gym. While checking the boys' locker room, a solid black figure ran past the showers. I rushed to find the intruder, not knowing what I would have done to it if I really found it, as I was completely unarmed except for a flashlight. After clearing the building twice and checking all the doors multiple times, I just took it as my imagination. The night of my birthday is when everything got much weirder. The shift change went as normal, and everything was fine up until 2:30 a.m., property and buildings check. When I went into the carriage house's top floor, where the school stores all spare desks and modern school equipment, it appeared that a person was standing in the back corner near the older stairs. I shouted at the figure and began to charge towards him. In a frenzy, I hurried to cut him off at the first door, but when I got to the door, it was still locked, and it was interior bolted. I searched the first floor when I found the doors to the service tunnels opened. On my first day, I was told never to enter the tunnels alone, as they expanded for miles in a labyrinth. And before I went in, I didn't contact a supervisor. I felt as if I walked for hours, but after only a few minutes, I hear in a very soft voice, almost like a kid's voice, "Happy birthday, Mr. Officer." The next thing I knew, my very angry supervisor, the school's maintenance director, and 2 CSPD officers were shaking me by the shoulders. My supervisor then informed me I missed my 3 a.m. check and was sitting in the corner of the tunnels in the dark for 3 hours. We all left the tunnels in the carriage house to see that the sun was beginning to rise. Later that day, my boss reassigned me to a different location after I was cleared from a doctor to go to work. I don't fully know what I saw when I was in those buildings, but it still gives me the chills. I never forget the voice that made me black out for so long. Happy birthday, Mr. Officer. My haunted apartment. As a child growing up in South Africa, I always had a fear of the dark. However, this fear was amplified when my mother and I moved into our apartment from my grandma's house. It was strange because at my grandma's house, I had no fear of sleeping alone. But in this new apartment, I couldn't even bear the thought of being alone in the house. Every time I left the bedroom, I would close the door because I always had an eerie feeling that something was watching me. My mom would dismiss my fears, but I knew deep down that she was just trying to make me feel better. We moved to a new apartment complex, but that's when all hell broke loose. I started seeing shadows in the corner of my eye, and I would keep the main door open when I came home from school, so I could open the curtains and turn the TV on and make it less quiet. I kept a Bible by my side at all times, and whenever there was a blackout, I refused to stay inside, and I'd wait for my mother to come back outside. The complex had connected hallways, so it would become pitch black when there was a blackout. Even the bathroom scared me, and I would always ask my mom to close the door after using it. One day I overheard my mom talking on the phone, and she mentioned that the previous owners said that the place was not spiritually clean. One day during a blackout, I was getting ready for school when the washing machine started shaking violently. I finished getting ready and booked it to school, refusing to go back inside until my mother came home later that day. I lived in that apartment for 3 or 4 years before moving back to my grandma's, but the paranormal experiences didn't stop there. To this day, I still have more stories to tell. I've always believed in the spirit world, but never experienced it myself until my daughter. As a child, I'd always been fascinated by the spirit world. I would eagerly watch shows, read books, and enjoy videos about ghosts and other paranormal phenomena. It was clear to me, even then, that children and animals have a special sensitivity to these things, and I was always intrigued by their experiences. As an adult, I found myself in a unique situation. My partner's house was haunted by not one, not two, but 3 spirits. His mother had told me countless stories about the strange occurrences in the house, and although I spent a lot of time there, I'd never experienced anything truly unsettling, just the occasional feeling of being watched or seeing something out of the corner of my eye. But there was one presence in particular that I had always felt, a male energy that seemed to linger in the basement. My partner's uncle had passed away 3 years ago, and I often saw shadows moving around in that area of the house. One day, while playing with our 2-year-old daughter in the living room, something strange happened. She suddenly looked forward towards the door and began to cry. She, I guess, was scared. My partner and I stopped what we were doing and asked her what was wrong, and she said she saw a ghost. At first, we were skeptical. After all, she was just a toddler who probably picked up the idea of ghosts from Halloween cartoons. But then my partner picked her up and faced her towards the door, and she immediately started screaming and grabbing onto him tightly. I quickly took our daughter into my arms and tried to comfort her, assuring her that the ghost wouldn't hurt her and everything was totally fine. Then I asked her to tell the ghost to leave, and to my surprise, she did. As soon as she said the words, she seemed to calm down and relax. I have to admit, I was more scared than she was. I'd always been fascinated by ghosts, but I'd never experienced anything like this firsthand. It was a strange and surreal experience, but it only deepened my interest in the spirit world. I couldn't help but wonder what other stories were out there, waiting to be discovered. The Ghost and Demon from the Garden. As I sat perched on the kitchen counter, gazing outside and lost in my own thoughts, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Turning to face the source of the disturbance, I saw a dark, ominous shape looming in the distance. It seemed to be watching me with a malevolent glint in its eyes. It grinned, stretching unnaturally wide across its shadowy face. At the time, I assumed that it was merely a person who had come to visit, perhaps a friend of my parents or a neighbor dropping by for a chat. However, as I approached the door to investigate, I quickly realized that there was no one there. Confused and a little unnerved, I ventured outside to see if anyone was hiding nearby, but the street was deserted. Returning inside, I asked my older brother if they had seen anyone lurking around the house, but they informed me that they had left and my father an hour earlier, both of them. I was perplexed, but ultimately shrugged it off as nothing more than a strange and inexplicable occurrence. However, as I grew older and began to learn more about the paranormal, I began to wonder if what I had seen that day was something far more sinister than a mere figment of my imagination. The idea that a demon may have been lurking outside, its fiery red eyes fixated upon me, filled me with a deep sense of dread and unease. Over the years, I thought back to the days, countless times, wondering what it was that I truly saw, what I may never know for certain, whether it was a demon or simply a trick of the light. The memory has stayed with me, a constant reminder that there are things beyond our understanding that may be watching us from the shadows. Throughout my life, I haven't had too many paranormal experiences. However, my recent encounter with the other side has left me with an unforgettable memory. It started when my step-grandma passed away. It was a sad and difficult time for her family, but what happened that night made me believe that there was life after death. The night she passed, my significant other was sleep-talking. He said something about Elizabeth, which was my step-grandma's name, and it caught my attention immediately. He had never heard her name before, so I knew it was something strange. Curiosity got the best of me, and I continued to have a conversation with him while he was sleep-talking. He mentioned that there was an old lady in the house, and my heart skipped a beat. But he continued to say that she was at the foot of the bed. At that moment, I was surprised that I wasn't scared. I felt like my step-grandma was stopping by to say goodbye. It was a bittersweet moment, but I felt grateful that she had thought of us in the transition to the other side. This experience made me believe that there's more to this world than what we can see with our eyes. It's opened up a new perspective on life and death, and I feel blessed to have had this encounter. Even though it was brief, it was a reminder that our loved ones never truly leave us. They may be gone physically, but their spirit lives on. It's comforting to know that they are watching over us and still present in our lives in their own special way. Stop making noises. I must say that the paranormal has been a constant presence in my life, from my earliest memories as a child to my present state as a 23-year-old adult. The range of my experience is wide and varied, but being suddenly yanked around, to being pushed down onto my back, to even being scratched by unseen forces. It seems that everywhere I go, except for one place, I've encountered paranormal activity. At first, these experiences would leave me feeling spooked and unnerved, but over time, I've grown accustomed to them. It's strange to say, but I've become desensitized to these occurrences. I suppose it's just like any other experience. The more you encounter something, the less it affects you. Currently, I'm living with my grandmother, who's in the early stages of dementia, and I'm taking care of her. One night, I was laying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a loud gasp or grunt at the end of my bed. There was nothing at the foot of my bed except some bins, and the sound was definitely human-like. Without any hesitation, I looked toward the end of the bed, took a deep breath, and said, "Shut up, bitch." It's not like that I'm trying to be rude, but honestly, I was too busy to be with any ghostly shenanigans. To be honest, it's just another day in my paranormal-filled life, but I can't help but wonder why I seem to attract these otherworldly entities. Is it something about me? Or am I just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Regardless, it's become part of who I am, and I'll keep on living my life, ghost encounters and all. A shadow figure I saw when I was a kid. As an adolescent, I've never had any paranormal experiences to speak of, except for one that stayed with me to this day. It happened on my birthday when my mom's old boyfriend, Scott, took us to the cabin on a campsite, along with some of his friends. On one particular night, everyone wanted to check out an abandoned cabin on the campsite, so I had to go along even though I would rather have stayed in the cabin. But when we got there, I found that it was dusty and filled with old belongings that were left behind. I decided to stay on the first floor, but while I was there, I saw a shadow in the closet that made my skin crawl. It wasn't like any other shadow I'd seen before, and it didn't seem to have a source. I knew it couldn't have been one of Scott's friends, as the shadow was far inside the closet to have been cast from the outside. The shadow was completely still and didn't move at all. It was definitely not mine, as it was too small to have cast such a large and ominous shadow. I wasn't scared at the time, but I couldn't stop wondering what it was and why it was there. To this day, I have no explanation for what I saw in that closet. I do know that that cabin used to belong to an old couple, but whether that had anything to do with the shadow or not, I can't say. The experience has stayed with me all these years, and it made me even more open to the idea that there might be more to this world than what we can see and comprehend. Lived in a haunted house with scary energy. Current home is my family home, moved out and back in, where I need assistance in how to move forward, whether it's cleansing, tapping in, basically just remaining in charge of my home and understanding how to handle it. When I was in my late teens and early 20s, I lived with my ex-boyfriend Shane and my daughter Leela. I believe whatever energy or spirit was in the home may have been attracted to my ex and possibly latched onto my daughter and me. Backstory. House isn't old, maybe 20 years when I moved in. We were the third people to live in it, and I actually knew both previous occupants, who had no issues with the house. Shane is Haitian from Haiti, and came here young and was a Canadian citizen. Although Haiti is known for voodoo-related things, he wasn't a believer and could make excuses for everything. So to list things that happened. Daughter between 1 and 3 during this time period. My daughter spoke very early and was 1.5 talking about black hole in her house. She pointed to it every time and was fixated on it, but terrified of it. One time her toy rolled under our table and I told her to get it at around age 3, and she hesitated and cried because the black hole was there. I was putting on my daughter's jacket to go out, and she asked if the lady upstairs was coming. Daughter scared to sleep at night because something was in her closet. I'd have Leela sleeping with my ex, he'd be out. I'd wait for him to come home because I was scared to sleep in the house most nights, and I'd hear heavy footsteps up the stairs and down my hallway, stopping at my bedroom door. Bedroom door also flew open aggressively, smacking a wall, and the door was shut and the handle broken, so you had to open it a certain way. I was already looking in the direction of the door, and I was terrified. The house door opened for Flo while I was cooking during spring. Shane and Leela outside. Out of the corner of my eye, I see someone enter into the kitchen behind me, my back turned doing the dishes. I feel Shane brush up against me and start talking. As I turn around, I realize no one's there. This was the only time I physically felt whatever it was touch me. When we first moved in, the first few nights, we slept in the living room. Shane wakes up in a panic, claiming to have seen an old woman's face appear. We had people over, and everyone was downstairs. I was upstairs in the child's room, and noticed Shane in the yard. So I opened the window and yelled out to him. We exchanged a few words. Then he said, "Who's behind you?" I said, "No one." He gets frustrated and says, "I see them. Who are you with?" He was jealous always. I say, "I'm alone." He went into the house, saw everyone at the table. As I'm just coming down the stairs, I have no idea what had been behind me. I had just finished my shift at work, have my daughter in my arms as I talk with my few coworkers. A regular customer comes in and joins our conversation, but she stares at my daughter and instantly blurts out, "Your daughter sees someone, doesn't she?" A woman. Then she said, "This isn't family. This is someone she's afraid of." I got caught off guard, but this validated that I wasn't crazy. Shane told me he woke up and saw something dark leaning over me as I slept. Within seconds, he was frozen with fear. He shut his eyes and started praying. He opened his eyes again, and it was gone. I woke up in a panic, gasping for air. No memory of the dream or sleep paralysis, which I also had at times with a tall man with a hat over me. Shane told me what happened and refused to sleep. Often woke up gasping, feeling like he hadn't slept at all. Had to rearrange my furniture so my back wasn't toward an open space, but I still felt angry eyes always on me. Very scary feeling. My family house I'm now in is what I need to help more navigating. When I was young, there was a bedroom that faces the stairs, and I refused to sleep in because I always felt watched and uneasy. Now as an adult in that room, not every night, but sometimes I feel exactly when a presence enters my room. I often ignore it, but it's creepy. Sometimes I feel like my bed shakes, or like my cat is jumping up and walking, but nothing is there. I do feel watched the odd time, example, on the treadmill, and feel someone behind me, so I get off and leave. I don't share my experience with my daughter, now 14, in the house in order to not freak her out. She's told me many times she feels like she's being watched, and she has seen something in our kitchen she thinks, all the lights off except for the TV, where she was, and I don't feel any threat in this house, but the unknown is unsettling at times. I've wanted over the years to connect with a psychic or a medium to give me insight, but I haven't. Would be open to it. Any tips on safely communicating with 3 ways to cleanse space and keep me and my daughter in a safe space? Any practices to add to my routine? Dying relative sees my unborn child I didn't know I was pregnant with. Let me regale you with a fascinating and mysterious tale of my grandfather's final days. He was in his early 60s and suffering from heart failure, a condition that's landed him in the hospital for a protracted stay. As his family, we spent a great deal of time with him during the last 2 weeks, trying to provide comfort and companionship during his time of need. One day, a group of 6 female relatives, including myself, were gathered in his room. chatting idly with him as he lay on his bed. Suddenly he interrupted our conversation in an abrupt, startling manner, looking around the room with a sense of urgency. "Which one of you is pregnant?" he demanded, his voice quivering with emotion. We all denied it, confused by his outburst. "Someone in this room is pregnant," he insisted. "Who is it?" None of us had any idea what he was talking about. At the time, we had been experiencing a great deal of pain and discomfort, and we assumed that his medication was causing him to hallucinate. We had been saying strange things like how people were visiting him at night, and how there were a lot of people in his room at times. He had even claimed to see people who had passed on. We chalked it up to be delusions of a dying man and thought little more of it. But then a few weeks later, I received some devastating news. I had become pregnant, but my ultrasound revealed that my baby had a weak heartbeat and that I could expect a miscarry. Sadly, within the week, I did suffer a miscarriage. The timing was eerie as my grandfather's outburst had occurred just 2 weeks into my pregnancy. It was as if somehow he knew that I was pregnant, despite my denial and disbelief. This incident's always made me question what people see when they're near death. Was my grandfather truly seeing visions of the future, or was it just a coincidence? The mystery only deepened when my grandfather was intubated. The medical staff had to take everything out one day, and he managed to find the strength to communicate with my mother, expressing his fear of dying based on what he had seen. Unfortunately, he passed away the next day, leaving us with many unanswered questions about what he had experienced in his final days. As I reflect on this strange and inexplicable event, I can't help but wonder what the secrets are beyond the veil of death. Is there a hidden realm that only the dying can see? Or is this just a trick of the mind? It's a mystery that may never be fully solved, but one that will continue to intrigue and fascinate me for years to come. Research. I'm wondering if anyone knows where or if I could find old records from my childhood home. Are there any online sites where I could access the records for it? I can't go to the town hall or courthouse for a while, as I'm in the UK until May. I'm writing a book about the hauntings that went on in this house, and I'm trying to find some old history about it for some filler pages in the beginning of the book. There was a guy who my sister knew who did some research on the property and told us that there is an old farmhouse that got destroyed by a tornado sometime in the 1900s, and that a grandmother, mother, and little girl died. Apparently, the father and husband rebuilt the house on the same property. He died, and then someone else added to the house in 1988. I just wanted to do some digging to see how much of that is true, because not only will it help with the book, but it'll also give me some insight into the hauntings that went on in that house, especially the violent entities that were in the house. So the things I'm trying to look for are property information before 1988. Were there any deaths in the current house as well as the old farmhouse that was supposedly on the property? If available, names of the family who perished in the tornado. I want to see if they have any living family members. I know it's a long shot, but I'm going into full research mode with this. My first experience up close. To start, I've been helping my mom move places for about 2 weeks now, and one thing I'm currently still working on is flooring. She decided to reuse her previous hardwood flooring in this house, so it's up to me to use as much in this transfer without wasting a single wooden plank. All that was left to do today was a single room, hall on the top of the stairs. It's just a 2-floor house, so the second floor can also be considered as the attic. I realized I forgot some tools at my own place, so I went back down preparing to leave when I noticed something upstairs. But it was too brief to make out what it was. I thought I had seen the light flickering. I did switch off the lights to save energy, so I thought maybe I didn't operate the switch properly. Turns out that wasn't it, because when I came back, I noticed I only switched off the light in the hallway downstairs, but not upstairs. Both switches are next to each other. So I was still thinking, and I imagined things. When I went back up to do some other chores, clean up and move most things downstairs so it's easier to lay the wooden floor, I just got downstairs when I noticed the light out again at the corner of my eye. It does flicker, not with the same pace or interval like a strobe light, but like it was struggling to stay on, like how a fluorescent tube flashes for a moment when you turn it on. So I just stare in disbelief, because it was working fine for the last 2 weeks. In my mind, it couldn't be broken, at the verge of dying, but it was indeed flashing. Just when I wanted to take a closer look by turning around and attempting to climb the stairs, it stopped. When I got back upstairs and went back to work, it happened again a couple times. The light was flickering from the top just briefly for maybe a minute and a half, sometimes less, then it would stop for a while. Only when I said something about it out loud, or asked or demanded it to stop, it stopped. And it didn't happen again. I was there for maybe 5 hours in total today, and the crazy thing is that another light is connected to the same switch and wiring. But that was totally fine. As if the flashing happened because I was working, while normally it would be quiet, or I wasn't allowed to be there. A man named Cyril Jones on Thanksgiving Day in 1954 had a strange encounter with a middle-aged human-looking being that had psychic abilities that Cyril was sure was not human. This is a great encounter story if you hadn't heard this one. I came across this encounter story recently and I find it very interesting for a number of reasons, but mainly how much it resonates with the more modern hypothesis of paranormal phenomena today. This story comes from a book called The Alien Gene by Myra McGee, released in 2020. It's a book all about the encounter stories with beings, but this was probably my favorite. Here's the story. Cyril Jones was working at a gas service station on Thanksgiving Day in 1954 in the Pacific Northwest, U.S. Himself and 2 other guys were on a job. The weather was apparently exceptionally bad. At around 10 a.m., Cyril described a middle-aged looking man that was approximately 5'8" in height, was of average medium build, had gray eyes and salt and pepper hair. Cyril described this man as unkempt and stubbly facial hair, and really old and beaten-up clothes and shoes. Cyril came to the conclusion that this man had been traveling for some time based on how rough he looked. The man said the transmission on his car had broken and that he just wanted permission to roll his car into the service station so that he could fix it himself. This man claimed that time was of the essence as he was driving to save a friend from cancer. He had already come all this way from Alaska. Interesting note is that Alaska did not become a full U.S. state until 1959. The other 2 workers that were not Cyril overheard this man's story before heading to the service garage where they started snickering jokes to each other, calling bullshit that he actually had the technical skill to fix the transmission. This man started directly relaying to Cyril the exact jokes and conversations the other 2 workers were cracking at the moment, even though they were now in the service garage where they could not hear them talking. At first, Cyril thought this guy must be an expert lip reader, but starts questioning that internally due to how precise he was being, and the fact that he couldn't even see the other workers. They were now out of sight. Cyril thinking to himself, can he really read people's thoughts? Is this guy for real, or is this just some sort of trick? The man just looked up at Cyril right in the eyes and said, "Young man, I am very real." Cyril, a little shocked but intrigued, helps the man push his car into the service garage and describes in awe a wide variety of instruments that covered the man's dashboard. Cars in 1954 didn't have much on the dashboard, and unfamiliar items in the trunk. I wish this was more elaborate, but alas. Cyril said, once they got in the garage, the man quickly got down to work, and did so with clear precision and expertise. Cyril came to the realization that this man was highly educated and intelligent. He thought how, outside the mind-reading trick and the odd appearance, this guy was like any average man. He still couldn't shake something was off, however. While the man was working, he talked to Cyril in a quiet and articulate manner. Cyril thought to himself that this guy was likely in his early to mid-50s, but the man replied back that he was much older than that. Having outlived several wives and having children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren, this is when things got really interesting. The man went on to recall his life living in various places around the globe before telling Cyril about the ruins of mysterious lost cities in the Himalayas and Andes mountain ranges, where beings from entire other worlds land their spacecraft, and other places on Earth which had special energies for which those knew how to tap into them. The man went on to explain how, in addition to extraterrestrials, there are also beings that exist far beyond our ability of perception in another dimension that are always and have been on Earth. It isn't clear if the man started talking about the ETs or the interdimensional beings now, but says a group of these beings appeared in humanity's hour of need, but we had to believe and sincerely seek them out, implying that we didn't. The man goes on to say that primitive and early people and cultures made contact all the time, but as humans became more civilized and less spiritual, have lost this ability to time. Cyril asks the man what he knows about the pyramids of Egypt, and he replied to him that the Great Pyramid of Giza was not a tomb, like mainstream history says, but that it was built by an ancient race of people that had been banished from Earth. That's ominous as fuck. The Egyptians, as we know, merely inherited the Great Pyramid from this lost race and civilization, that the pyramid's purpose is to be a mathematical statement about the Earth and the Earth's relationship to the Sun, solar system, and greater universe. The man goes on to explain this aura, or invisible force field, that's part of every living thing, and that this is where what we call psychic or telepathic abilities come from. That all living things have the potential to tap into these gifts, but our modern society and culture teaches us from a very young age not to trust or grow such abilities, writing them off as coincidence, imagination, or kids just being kids. The man was explaining all these things, all while working on his car. While Cyril didn't entirely understand everything the man was saying, and some of the technical language used, he was fascinated by the conversation. Cyril also mentioned that while asking these particular questions out loud, the man would begin answering his questions before he even finished asking them, as if he was anticipating or already knew what he was going to ask next. Cyril says that the man repaired this transmission faster than he'd seen anyone fix one before. It took about an hour. The man started his car, and it roared to life. Before he left, he put on his old, faded trench coat, shook Cyril's hand, and said to him, "There's not enough time to tell you more today. Look into these matters on your own, keep an open mind. You'll be a better person for it." The man hopped in his car and drove away. Cyril thinks it's still odd that this man just drove off when the weather outside was still horrid and not safe. He also realizes that he never asked for the man's name. He later came to the conclusion that the man was some sort of non-human intelligence. Dancing Ghost. Story not mine, but someone my mom knew. I think her uncle, her dad's friend. We'll just call him Dan. Dan used to work in a medium-distance place. He used to come from a station. Whenever he would come, he would see this girl dancing at the end of the station. Nothing in front of her asking for money or anything. Just dancing. He didn't think much of it, as he'd seen some pretty weird shit in his life. For the first few weeks, he would just notice, but soon he realized that no one else seemed to look at her. But oh well, he thought. Well, this one day, there was a kid with his parents playing around with a ball. He threw the ball and it went across the station, and the barnland where the station end path ended. The mother saying something to the child, something as to not throw a ball towards Dan's direction, directing to the family, and he saw as the father went and got the ball. He watched as the father threw the girl twice, like right inside and outside, walked through her. Dan got horrified. He got up from his seat and went over to the tea stall and asked the man working there, "Hey, do you see that girl?" "Which girl, sir?" "The girl that's dancing." "Sir, there is no girl that is dancing on the station." The man asked Dan to sit down and gave him a cup of tea because he was freaking out. And then he explained that there was a girl that used to play music and dance here. She lived a few minutes away, but she wanted to become a dancer, but she was bullied by the boys that also lived nearby. And one day they made a video of her. And since it was a small area, she was getting more and more bullied as she was stared at everywhere she went. And one day, while sitting here in the station, she decided to give up on her life and jump in front of the train. Nine. I'm from Laredo. Currently live here going to college. The scariest thing to me in Laredo is the old abandoned hospital down south. Now it's scary for many reasons. Some simply creepy, others kind of fucked up. The first floor is more creepy because of all the heroin needles and shit. It's kind of that the floor where hobos and people who don't want to be bothered shoot up. I don't know if they still shoot up there. I visited it once in high school and never again. The other floors don't have anything actually scary. They have a really creepy vibe though. Like, don't go alone and don't go towards the room that makes a lot of noise. The worst floor is the one with the morgue on it. I don't really believe in ghosts, but if they exist, it'd be on that floor. At night, you're guaranteed to find something weird. We went with what scared me half to death first, was we heard beeping, like for those heart monitors, or whatever they're called. We came to the door, and it was unplugged and turned off, but I swear we heard that exact sound. And the room where the morgue was, I heard loud bangs and something similar to cabinets opening up and closing. I did not go near or open that door. Seen too many movies to know I'd fuck up. I think the next scariest thing had to be one of the highest floors. Now this is scary because if I was alone, I guarantee you I would have died. The stairs up there kind of split off in two directions toward two different doors. I was casually walking toward the door to my right, and I feel my friend grab me and yank me back hard. At this point, I'm kind of pissed, like, why'd you do that? He proceeds to show me an area immediately after the door where the floor caved in, and it's an immediate drop. I don't know how far down. I just know it would have been fatal. All in all, scariest building in Laredo. If you're in to visit, I'd warned it, it's fenced off and has no sign, no trespassing. But there are areas where the fence is in such bad condition, you can sneak by. Legally, I will say don't do it, but I'm an internet stranger. I can't tell you what to do.